of Bonhoeffer.
Being a Christian is less about cautiously avoiding sin and more about actively and courageously pursuing God's will.
Action springs not from thought, but from a readiness of responsibility.
There is meaning in every journey that is unknown to the traveler.
Discipleship is not an offer that man makes to Christ.
Many students at King's identify their namesake based on the significant works that they completed in their life. While this is good, it lacks the motivation and leaves a two-dimensional character that inspires only by pithy words or brave deeds. By really recognizing the convictions that spurred the actions of the great men and women we strive to emulate, we can better imitate them. As the house that bears the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we seek to uphold those principles that marked Bonhoeffer's life and works. Bonhoeffer's story is marked by a perseverance in righteousness, a growth in integrity, conviction in life and conviction in death, courageous service, and a commitment to Christ-centered community. Living in Germany, Bonhoeffer grew up in the middle of the angst and tragedy of World War I. He lost one brother and had another who returned battle-wounded and angry at God. But rather than get caught up in the economic and political turmoil, Bonhoeffer surprised his family and found solace in studying theology. The truths that he internalized gave him the ability to persevere in righteousness through tragedy. Now, righteous actions can come in fits and spurts, but not so with integrity. Integrity requires a diligent fortitude in the face of difficulties, a continuing resistance in the face of temptations, and an unwavering courage in the face of opposition. Bonhoeffer's growth in integrity coincided with his intentional pursuit of truth. And as with that, his desire to grow the church.
After deciding at the age of 14 that he wanted to become a pastor, Bonhoeffer pursued his goal energetically, earning a doctorate in theology only 7 years later. He spent 2 years as a vicar in Spain and 1 year at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. And after that, he became a faculty member at the University of Berlin in Germany. And then after that, he was surprised by the racial injustices he saw in America, which later inspired him to be resistant to the growing German anti-Semitism. Like most Christians, Bonhoeffer struggled with the relationship between church and state. As a young German from a patriotic family, he understood the love for country. Although he didn't really agree with it, he later viewed the church and the state as separate entities ordained by God for different purposes. Though this was tacitly acknowledged by most Germans, he soon came to learn that it was the vital point in the influence of Nazi-related German Christians. After his time, later, however, after his time there, and after I forget this line, he later came to find the confessing church as a way to resist German opposition and to become a large member in the society that resisted Nazi spreading in the church.
In an age where the national ego of the state was infused into the doctrines of the churches of the land, only in his late 20s, the young Dietrich Bonhoeffer saw right through the Nazification of the churches of his country. And driven by his Christian convictions, he refused to allow Adolf Hitler's de-Christianizing of German Christianity to go unchallenged. And so it was that in the 1930s, Bonhoeffer led a front a real front against Der Fuhrer, calling on all of his countrymen regularly through radio and through paper to resist the growing power of the state and to refuse compromise at a cost of theological impurity. And like the convictions by which he lived, he was undaunted at failure. Not even when his illegal seminaries in Zingst and Finkenweide were threatened and eventually shut down by the Gestapo. Still, throughout the course of his crusade, as it pressed on, Bonhoeffer came to realize more and more the consequences that entailed further resistance to the Nazis. And on June of 1939, on the eve of the most destructive conflict in human history, Dietrich Bonhoeffer returned here to New York City in the hopes of waiting out the impending maelstrom. But his Christ-centered convictions soon led him to a revelation that would change his life. To die is Christ, he said, knowing full well that his fate lay not in the security of America, but in Germany, the heart of darkness where the light of God was needed the most.
So Dietrich boarded the last scheduled ship across the ocean to Germany. And in doing so, he took the last step in his life's journey, writing to his friend Bishop Bell, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." And soon after he returned to Germany, he joined the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service. While many in the Abwehr were ardent nationalists, they saw Hitler as somebody who was destroying Germany. And because they saw him in this way, they plotted to remove him from power. As an agent for the Abwehr, Bonhoeffer frequently traveled abroad, both gathering information for the Reich, but also spreading or communicating with the outside powers, the Allied powers, in order to tell them about the Nazi atrocities. When asked what he prayed for, he said, "If you really want to know, I pray for the defeat of my country." Before his arrest in 1943, Bonhoeffer served as an inspiring conscience within the conspiracy movement, inspiring them through their very, very difficult task. Although he was executed for his involvement in the conspiracy, he wasn't actually arrested for that. He was arrested for smuggling out 14 Jews disguised as Abwehr agents, a feat which itself took no small amount of courage.
Up until the very end of his life, Dietrich Bonhoeffer continued to search out community. He realized that while the Christian religion often compared spiritual and the physical needs of Christianity, more than that was the individual and the communal needs of Christianity. Even after his seminaries were shut down by the Gestapo in Germany, he continued to reach out to his former students, visiting them while they were in prison and keeping in touch with their families and loved ones. Even after Dietrich Bonhoeffer himself was arrested, he continued to minister to his jailers and his fellow prisoners. He would lead them in small Sunday gatherings, and they would worship God and pray with one another in community. This continued until the day before his death. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life was marked by one of discipleship. On April 9th, 1945, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hung by the Nazi regime. Despite this, one of the doctors of the camp noticed something different about Bonhoeffer, and he spoke to the motivation that Dietrich Bonhoeffer lived by. He said,
"I was so deeply moved by the way this man prayed. In all my years of being a doctor, I have never, ever seen anyone die so entirely submissive to the will of God."